Hello, my name is Dari, and today I'm going to talk about mistletoe. But probably not in the way that you think. Most people, when they think of Nordic mythology, know mistletoe as the plant that killed Balder, and while this is true in multiple versions of the stories, it's not always told the same way. Most people are familiar with the story in which Loki basically tricks the blind god Hodr to shoot an arrow at Balder, when this is not always the case. There is a version of the death of Balder myth where Loki is surprisingly not involved. In this version of the story, Balder and Hodr are both well-respected warriors, leaders of entire warbands. And they are indeed brothers, but they are fighting over the affections of Nanna, who, in the myths that most people are familiar with, is indeed Balder's wife. Also different in this version of the story is how Balder gains his invincibility. Instead of things basically promising not to hurt him, he seems to be partaking of some magical food that makes him invincible. But whatever the case may be, Hodr knows that he cannot destroy Balder by regular means, and so travels to Helheim to gain a magical sword which is often given the name Mistletoe, or rather Mistilteinn, depending on the translation, also called horsetail. So he wounds Balder in such a way that Balder dies of his wounds, and then he himself is still killed by an avenger of Odin. Though in this case, the avenger seems to be called Baus. This version of the story is primarily found in the writings of Saxo Grammaticus. However, there does seem to be an Icelandic version of Hodr going into hell to get a sword as well. However, there are also legends of a sword that never dulls, that is also called Mistilteinn, that shows up in another saga. Specifically the Icelandic saga of Hrungnir Gripsson. He gained the sword by going to the burial mound of an earlier king who had become a draugr, claiming the sword after he won the fight, using it to eventually slay someone who had slain his own brothers. Now, there's obviously more to both of these stories, however, I do like the similarity. In one way, they had to travel to a place of death to earn the sword. Now, exactly why the sword is called mistletoe when it's entirely possible that ancient Nordic people would not have known about mistletoe is kind of up to anyone's guess. Many people will say that it's horsetail. But we see mistletoe not only needing to be earned in a rite of death, but in heavily associated with kinslaying. And the later myth will it seems to be used to avenge kinslaying. Now obviously the fact that there are different versions of this myth is not going to surprise anyone with any interest in mythology or folklore, because there just are going to be regional differences, period. But the Saxo Grammaticus version of Baldur's death does seem to bring into question why Snorri Sturluson would use Loki in the way that he did. And while it's also possible that in the Saxo Grammaticus story Loki tells Hodr how to acquire the sword, it's still a little less upfront and he's a lot less antagonistic in that myth. But Loki is also not always an antagonist. He is often also portrayed as being a companion to both Odin and Thor on many journeys. And I do think that relationship with Loki, with the myths both as we mostly know them coming from Snorri, as well as in general, can be an interesting topic of discussion. Ultimately, one way or another, I do think that we can agree that Snorri Sturluson used Loki as a literary device, as a character to be seen throughout. Even in myths that may not have originally had him as a participant. But, as always, mythology and the cultural context around them evolve in a variety of ways. Thank you for watching, I really do appreciate you all, and remember to be vigilant.